welcome to Let's Talk Early Years. In studio with me is the charismatic Stephanie Martin. Stephanie Martin is an author, an academic, a speaker. Amongst so many things, I call her the serial entrepreneur. She's doing so many things. But today she's talking to us about communication, speaking, barriers to communication, listening styles. I am so excited to hear how we can spark that joy in our earlier settings by adequate and effective communication. Welcome, Stephanie Martin.
Melanie, it is an absolute pleasure and a delight to be here. And I just want to start by saying thank you for having me. It's a privilege and congratulations on this amazing platform because your voice needs to be heard and you know how I feel about what the education space needs. So thank you for having me and it's lovely to be here.
Thank you. I want to say that when I started with the idea, when it was just a concept, you were probably the first person who I actually verbalized it to. And the words you said to me were, I want this for you. Stephanie, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I can share your light and your vibrancy and your knowledge and your expertise with the rest of the early years community. So thank you. Now tell us, who is Stephanie Martin?
I love that you started with such an easy question. It's actually one of the questions that now I've had to rethink because I guess I liken myself to a Rubik's Cube. You know, there's many layers to me. There's many facets to me. And so traditionally, my background is education. I have 15 years in education. I started in Australia, then came here to the UAE as a teacher and then a leader. And since then, I've founded Advanced Education Consultants, where we work with schools, we work with universities, nurseries in the early years, as you know, just to improve practices all around, from leadership all the way down to teaching, our interactions with our students and our parents, our interactions and the way we're delivering curriculum, for me has always been my why in making educational experiences profound for our learners. So that is one side of me. I'm also a published author and a researcher in education in the space of academia. And my other why is communication, which obviously is why I'm here today to talk with you. So I have 30 years of experience in public speaking and performance. I think when I was 4 years old, Melanie, I literally knew I was born to communicate with others and to share that gift of how to communicate effectively with other people. And my family would tell you she didn't stop talking from 4 years old. So
you and me both.
Maybe it's a South African thing.
Yeah.
But so that has always been for me an important part of what I do, and I guess it stems from my education background, understanding how to get the message across to the other person. And so from that I founded a program called She Speaks, where we really help, namely women, but everybody, understand how to become what I call a magnetic communicator, how to impact people, how to walk into a room with nothing but your energy and own that and leave people remembering you long after you're forgotten. That's my why in communication. And aside from that, I run a smoothie company here called Sip, and I'm a mother as well, so life keeps me busy, but that's me. That's my Rubik's Cube.
I love it. I love the energy you bring to education, Stephanie. We need a fresh voice. And I believe that She Speaks by Stephanie Martin is that voice.
Thank you.
So tell me, what do you deem or how would you define effective communication?
Effective communication for me, something people don't realize is that communication in general is not just about speaking and talking. It's what I call a synergistic energy exchange. So we are, even right now, literally just exchanging energy with whoever it is we're interacting with. It's an energetic thing. There's two parts to it. We have the sender of information, so that might be me giving you information right now. And then there's also the receiver of the information. And we go back and forth exchanging this energy. What a lot of people don't understand is that in the first 7 seconds of interacting with somebody else, someone has already made an impression of you. It used to be 30 seconds. Research now says it's 7 seconds.
Right.
And so
first impressions do last.
First impressions last. Yes. And you know, it actually takes, they say up to 7 to 8 interactions after that to undo a bad first impression.
Wow.
that's how long it takes us to regain or revive that impression that we might have given that wasn't a great first impression.
Yes.
And so really body language, voice, eye contact are all part of it. But also the other half of that is three things. And I say it's what we say, as many people know. It's it's what you say, it's how you say it. So our words and our tone. But it's also when you say it, when you actually choose to deliver information or to pause and not speak. The other half of that is just listening, really. That's the other part of it. So to be an effective communicator, I think, is also about understanding how to be a good listener as well.
Tell me, in our context, in the earlier setting, how important is effective communication in shaping our culture?
I think it's not even just about early years education. I really think it's about education as a whole, workplaces as a whole, any setting as a whole. But in the early years, because you have your output of energy is up here. You're dealing with everyone from babies to toddlers to parents on a daily basis, and then the staff communication comes in. Tensions can be high. Emotions are often high. There's a lot of urgency. There's compliance. There's safeguarding. There's a lot of hats that you wear. So quite often, what I think is most important in early years is people understanding the other person's communication style, understanding how to actually interact. Because your own communication style, for example, is unique. It's like your personality. It's as unique as your fingerprint. We all have a different makeup. We have different cultures, especially here, different perspectives, different stories, morals, upbringings that have shaped the way that we communicate, the way that we take on feedback, accept information from people, take on new ideas. As teachers, sometimes we can be quite guarded. Sometimes we can think we know it all.
Yeah.
You know, we are experts in the field,
Yes.
but sometimes we can be fixed in our ways as opposed to growth.
Right.
And so in early years, I would say the biggest thing that often gets forgotten is just understanding the other person and where they're coming from, particularly when it's feedback. Quite often people can take it as a personal attack, for example, when sometimes we just need to remove that emotion from the situation.
Yeah. You speak about you've spoken about various barriers that we might have, and I'd like to just expand a little bit about our cultural, our ethnicity. How does that affect the culture in the nursery school when we're not adequately communicating? Help us in that space, Stephanie.
So without going too deep into the academic side of it, we all have, and if you think about anyone who's listening, for example, how many different nationalities make up your staff? Quite often, it's not that we're all from the same country. When I run professional development, one of the questions I like to start with is who here is from the UAE and has been born in the UAE and lived here their whole lives? And usually it's less than 10% of the room.
Right.
When I ask, where are we from? What country are you from? How long have you been here? We're generally all expats, with a very low percentage of locals that make up the staff. So that already tells you we've got different cultures, we've been brought up slightly differently, but the language factor is also something. And so language is just a cue, right? We are just reading and deciphering codes, but every language has its own makeup. Some languages are more complex, some are more idiomatic. For example, if you think about Zulu in the African culture, South African culture, it's very idiomatic.
Yes.
Sometimes Arabic can be that way.
Yes.
We know the word inshallah, for example, has so many different contextual meanings to it.
Right.
But if you're not aware of that, then you might not understand the other person.
You're speaking about the South African now, or just now?
Just now means a lot of things.
Right.
Yeah. And so we're all bringing this into the workplace without actually necessarily understanding your background and where you come from. Just to take it again to South African culture as an example, the translation of Afrikaans to English can sometimes be very direct. And so if someone didn't know that about you, and let's say that you had a much stronger Afrikaner speaking background as opposed to someone who's speaking English, maybe your English isn't on par with your mother tongue, someone might just perceive you as being a really direct, rude person, but actually you're not. It's just the way that your language translates to English. So English is very literal. Sometimes other people's backgrounds are more, you need the context to understand it. So that's just me breaking it down. But what people often don't understand is I need to also understand that person's culture sometimes. It's not just enough to say, they said this to me and now I feel like this. Sometimes we just need to understand the person, understand why do they speak that way?
Yeah.
Oh, that's their way of being this. It's not always personal.
Yes.
It's not always emotional.
So perhaps just slow down a little bit, right?
Slow down and understand that everyone's a human being.
Yes.
First and foremost,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And I think if we can understand that we're all in this melting pot, cultural melting pot here, but there's a beauty in that.
Yeah. I agree. Stephanie, also you spoke about the various amounts of people that we're dealing with. So we're often communicating upward, you know, it's owners and company executives that you're dealing with, and then on a contemporary basis where you're dealing with other nursery directors or managers or finance managers, depending on the layout of your business, and then you're talking to your team, your cleaners, your teachers.
It's a lot of talking happening.
It's a lot of talking happening in the nursery school. How do we find that equilibrium? How do we all find that space where we can adequately communicate respectfully with one another in the workplace to bring that culture of joy, that culture of respect to the workplace?
I think it comes down to, first and foremost, I'm going to go back to understanding people's communication styles, because quite often people just think there's 4 types. You know, I'm passive, or I'm passive aggressive, or that person's passive aggressive, or they're aggressive, or they're assertive. Now, we're never one communication style 24/7. You might have your assertive hat on when you're talking to perhaps your nursery owner, or perhaps you'll have a more, sometimes, and I say this because we all have this in us, a moment where you are more passive aggressive, right? But there's more to it than that. That's just a very base level. And there's actually round about 12 different communication styles. But to break it down, we have people who are dominant. It's called the DISC model. People who are dominant, people who are seeking influence, people who are steady in their communication, and people who are more compliant. Now, if you have a dominant personality or communication style and you're dealing with someone who's a more compliant person isn't going to really give direction. They're going to work best by taking direction. They're probably going to be more passive as well. So if I'm a very dominant communicator, that means I'm results driven. I'm all about logic. Quite often leaders wear this hat. We need to understand how to come down to the level, sometimes not down as being inferior, but to approach a conversation. Let's pretend it's a hard conversation where you need to tell someone they've got to improve. How can I break the ice here? If I'm a dominant person, I probably am going to react really badly to you coming in and saying this is wrong. So remembering that you're dealing with humans and not robots. How often do you ask someone, how are you, Melanie, before you go in with the problem that needs solving? How's your day going? Great. I just need to talk to you about this.
Yes.
We're humans. And so understanding those types, if you've got someone who's seeking the influence, that means they're really externally motivated. They want the promotion. They want the gold star. They want to be told they did a great job. They want the praise. Someone else who's more steady might not like lots of praise and public recognition. So that doesn't work for them. That's all us learning about everyone's different communication styles. If you've got a hard conversation, where are you having the hard conversation? Is it always come to my office?
Yes.
And your office is isolating and quite overwhelming for somebody. Do you perhaps instead have the conversation in their classroom with them? Just to even the playing field.
Right.
Because then it changes the dynamic. It changes, we see a change in people's body language. There's not that defensive guard up. So I think just assessing the situation, reading the room, and understanding how every person communicates and how they intake that information is really important.
Right. So DISC, right?
DISC, D-I-S-C, yes.
Again, tell us what it...
So we're going with D as being dominant.
Right.
I as being, I'm an influential type. I seek influence. S is for steady and C is for compliance.
Right. And we don't want to necessarily fit into the modus of just that one. We actually want to be an holistic DISC person, DISC communicator.
And you might be a hybrid type. I don't think anyone, very rarely is is someone ever one type and that's it.
Right.
There's no hard and fast black and white rule with it. But sometimes in some situations, you might find yourself taking a back foot and be more passive. In other situations, you might be more dominant because that's what the situation requires of you. But it's just, how do you communicate when you're in that zone of your communication?
Stephanie, the nursery school, I like to say it's a lot of moving parts. It's busy. Everything is almost always urgent. We are...
It needed to be done yesterday.
Yes. We are always just listening for the last few words of your sentence.
Absolutely.
To give us the instruction. Like, really, what do you want to get done? What's your point? That's where we're at, because it's so busy, everything,
Time is of the essence.
Time is of the essence. We need to be safe. We need to be on point. We've got compliance, etc. We never listen with intention. And I know saying never is really, really a huge statement, but I find that even myself, we're really just listening for the instruction or the point.
Get to the point.
How can we be better listeners?
It comes back to being responsive. Like, I love the word intentional. Sometimes we try to be intentional, though. My intention is to listen to you while I'm sending this email, but I also just want you to get to the point. So instead of listening to respond, listen to understand first.
Yeah, say that again.
Instead of listening to respond instantly, listen to understand first. And when you listen to understand to what the person is trying to get across to you, you hear more than words. You're hearing, how that person is feeling today, what might be going on in their world, what you're actually listening to a person, you're looking them in the eyes and you're understanding them, just giving them that moment. And I know it's, in our rapidly paced world, so easy to just continue on doing 5 other things. Instead of being ready to say something the second that person pauses and stops speaking, take a breath first. Take a breath before you respond. And it really does make a difference to how you respond, because your brain's had a second to do a few things, to let your tense self drop a little bit, to relax, to also not reply with the first thing that comes out of your mouth without a filter. And this often happens when we're stressed, when we're burnt out, when we're busy. We can be quite short sometimes, or we can say something without really giving it perhaps.
So basically in the nursery school, this
Give
is
me an
prevalent.
example.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
This is it. Yeah. So I would say that's my biggest thing, is just listen to understand rather than listening to get your point across straight away and respond and have rebuttal perhaps. Yeah.
I like that
So
intentionality. You spoke this week on your Instagram. I love following you. Please follow Stephanie Martin on She Speaks by Stephanie Martin. She's amazing. She's got hints and tips and talks and tricks on how to just elevate your communication, how to elevate as a person. You need to follow her. She Speaks by Stephanie Martin. Steph, you spoke about listening styles. I had never heard of such a concept. Tell us more.
Again, it comes down to what is your communication style, number one, but I'm going to give you an example of feedback. Now, some people don't want to take feedback, and that's to do with your listening style, right? I see you smiling there. Some people have more of a defensive listening style, and you just mentioned this then in your example. It can be, what does this person need? I just need to know what they need. And that's the only reason we're listening, is to understand what's needed here. It's transactional, if you like. Then we have other people who are, and I'm sure you can think of a few people who are great listeners, who you leave feeling seen and you leave feeling heard. And that's the mark of a good listener, is that we're not listening to instantly make the conversation about ourselves. So for example, if you were telling me something that had happened that was stressful, let's pretend it's between an employee, an educator and a leader in the nursery, for example. Instead of responding instantly saying, yeah, that happened to me as well, what you've done is you've closed down that person's space and you've instantly put your energy in the space and your experience in the space, rather than allowing that person to just unfold their story a little more, unfold their experience, expand. and just hold that space for them. That's what a good listener does.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we're so busy, we forget that. We forget the importance of allowing that person. So my advice there is really just ask a follow-up question before you jump in with your version of what happened or your advice or your feedback. Sometimes we're telling someone something, not for feedback, just to share that. But often the person who's so willing and ready to respond instantly, maybe that dominant type of listener, doesn't understand that the person isn't seeking advice from you. I just wanted to share with you, or I just felt this was a space I could share. So asking that follow-up question rather than jumping in with what you have to say immediately makes such a difference to just having that harmonious team building workspace.
Yes. And that's what we're after. We want to create that a harmonious space. We want to create a culture of respect. And so I hear you saying respecting people, having them leave you feeling seen and heard should be our intention. I hear you saying that intentionality, that how we approach one another is with intention.
Absolutely.
Because Stephanie, you know, you're an educator. We can talk for days. We don't even need a context.
We don't need to take a breath either. Sometimes we just
keep going. You know, we just keep going.
Absolutely.
And we just keep talking. I hear you saying that pause, stop talking. Actually,
know when to stop talking is one of the most important tools I learned in public speaking. Knowing when to actually not talk is just as important as knowing when to speak.
Right.
Because we all want to be heard.
Yes.
We've all been in a meeting where that one person, sadly, took up the whole meeting with their ideas, their dominance, their space. If you are that kind of communicator as well, we all have a little bit of that in us. It's not a weakness, by the way. There's not one stronger or worse communication style. So I always want to say that and preface it with that. But understanding where maybe you have those weak spots of not being a good listener. And for example, I grew up in a family that it was like a tennis match. At the dinner table, everyone needs to get in a word at the same time.
Right.
And I remember my husband coming to dinner for, one of the first times, and he was just back and forth, because that's how we grew up. Now, I realized I can't take that communication style into every context I'm in, because not everybody knows me in that way. And I'm not always interacting with people who work and who communicate at that level.
Exactly.
So you also need to understand the context.
Right. So again, that's coming back to taking that moment to pause and to actually be intentional about the setting, about the environment, about who you're addressing.
Absolutely.
Yeah? Okay. Stephanie, in the nursery school again, power dynamics are there. How does that play into, or how can that be a barrier? Is it a barrier? Is it a barrier to communication?
It doesn't always have to be, is what I would say. And I think when we talk about power, obviously, there's the different leadership styles. Everyone has a different leadership style in the same way everyone has a different communication style. And they both, intertwine with each other.
Right.
When we talk about power and leadership, we always hear that saying, a good leader leads from the back. Right. They don't need to lead from the front. We have, the authoritarian leadership style. We have more laissez-faire. Everyone is different. But understanding the way that you communicate with certain other people, because it can be a barrier. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It can be a barrier if the person who has that power, if the person at the top of the pyramid, if you like, with the power, if it's used to just control and to always, let's say, demean or talk down to people, or, it's quite bureaucratic in its style, then there will be a power struggle, or there will be pushback, or there'll be resistance, or what will happen is the people beneath you, per se, the people who are working under your leadership will stay quiet, and you actually lose some of your strongest personalities because people become scared to talk up, for example. Right. So when we talk about power, I think I like to say leadership as opposed to power, but in saying that, some people also fear power, or they fear, and again, that also comes back to our cultural backgrounds. We don't know whether someone has come from another workplace where there was a really toxic relationship with the people who had the power per se.
Right.
So sometimes there's a reason why some people might respond a certain way, but it doesn't always have to be about that. It doesn't always have to be about, subordinates. I once had a leader say, that person is my inferior. And I thought,
Wow.
So it also comes back to, if you are a leader, checking what's my communication style. You don't have to keep the same communication style. That's the beauty of speaking and learning about ourselves, is you learn that you can switch it up, and mirroring the energy of the other person is really important. It comes back to just reading the room of the people that you're in.
Right.
Then
in tandem to that, how does the recipient's self-confidence play into that power struggle, if we can phrase it that way?
Let's call it a power struggle. And I think so again, it comes back to knowing yourself and your triggers. Triggers play such a big part of communication and how we receive. So the two parts, the sender and the receiver. Your communication style as a leader, I'm just going to use you for an example. You might be more dominant, let's say, in the workplace when you generally have interactions. But it might not always be a bad thing. Just because you're dominant, it doesn't mean that you're a toxic leader or that you're really authoritative. Someone who doesn't have a lot of confidence in themselves might always receive feedback as a personal attack.
Yeah.
But it comes back to letting that person understand that this is not a personal attack on you. Setting the scene first, setting the stage for the conversation you're about to deliver. But that also comes back to that person doing the inner work on themselves to understand, how can I receive feedback better? How can I get to a point where it's not, this person isn't attacking me, and removing the emotion from the situation is a really big one. So having the conversation and saying, I always say, remain task orientated rather than personally.
Yes.
Talk about what's wrong here with the task.
Keep it professional.
Absolutely. And if we keep it task specific rather than, Melanie, you didn't do this, that person who doesn't have a great deal of self-confidence isn't going to go away and, attack themselves at home and overthink it and overanalyze.
Yes. I also hear you talking about the environment and creating that context where that person can respectfully receive perhaps negative feedback, that we are conscious that it's not perhaps happening in the corridor, in the classroom where other colleagues are present, or where the children are present, or where other parents are present, that we're mindful, again, with the intentionality of our conversation.
And you put it beautifully, Melanie, just then to our teachers. I mean, we are in, one of my favorite researchers, Professor John Hattie, says we're in the business of human improvement. Like, what a noble thing we have, a role that we play. We still need to also treat our educators with that same respect that we expect, as a leader, because they themselves are leaders in their own right. Absolutely. And I think that's a really important thing to remember too. The respect goes both ways.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have that amongst each other, beautiful things happen,
I couldn't agree more, Stephanie. I couldn't agree more. So, context, environment, intentionality, respect, empathy. You touched right at the beginning onto body language.
Yes.
Elaborate for us a little bit about body language and how that plays.
Body language is just, it actually says more about us than our words. So, I spoke about what we say, how we say it. Your first impression is 60% body language, because, as I said, communication is energy. Eye contact plays such a big part in how we receive the other person. Now, eye contact can be really full on. It can be sometimes too much. There's such a thing as too much eye contact, and when it's a little confronting for somebody else. That might be that you're just staring this person directly in the face and you're never blinking and you're never pausing and you're giving feedback that's quite hard for the person to hear.
Well, I'm scared just looking at you
I'm doing it to you right now. Can you feel it? See?
Yes.
I'm exchanging the energy.
Exactly.
But when we're warm, when we're open in our posture, when we're a little more relaxed, that's where I guess that more assertive side of us comes in as well. There's a way to still speak directly. You don't have to sugarcoat everything. that you're saying. If something's wrong, particularly when it's something like safeguarding.
Yes.
That's not an easy conversation.
Right.
But the assertive manner in which you deliver it with your body language, you don't need to stand and tower above the other person. You and I are sitting right now, and there's an even playing field between us. So relaxing yourself with your body language, opening your chest a little, not standing with your arms across your chest, staring down at somebody,
Yes.
and just relaxing. I can't stress it enough, is that if we're relaxed, it means suddenly there's a warmth to how we're received on the other side. So eye contact, number one. Number two, that openness in your body language. Number three, I'm going to bring it back a little to the pausing, but putting down whatever you're doing to look at someone when they're speaking is such a gift to the person who's trying to actually have the conversation with you. It's so easy now to still keep scrolling and nod and pretend that we're listening. And what that automatically says is, I'm not valuable enough for this person to give me that time. And really the same as looking up from the laptop. It's tempting. We're busy. I get it. But just to stop and actually give that person our attention with our body language makes a difference.
Yeah. I read a statistic that said 38% is the how, 7% are actually the words, and then 55% is in the body language.
Absolutely. What did I say? 60? I was close.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So
it is.
that non-verbal communication is then so important in how we create that culture in our nursery school, that joy.
It is. And do you know why that is too? Is because we are just trying to figure out whether we can trust the other person. And our body language says we're just giving these energetic vibrations to each other. We're like atoms all in the same little bubble. And we're either going to butt heads with people, or we're going to just harmoniously bubble along in our nursery environment. But really, like what you just said, it's just about understanding, that I can trust this person, I feel safe around this person, and I feel open with this person.
That's what
Comes
we want.
from body language.
Yeah, we want that in our early year settings.
Yeah.
Stephanie, last words.
Last words. I think effective communication and just communicating in general. Sometimes we like to complicate it. I mean, we've just spoken about a lot of statistics, facts, reading the room. But I think it really just comes down to remembering that we are just people at the end of the day. We are a tiny grain of sand in this big universe. We're on a spinning marble. And just understanding how to read the other person, give the person space. But also, if you're someone who's not confident in communication, remember that you have your voice. It's a gift. Use it. And also give the person that you're talking to the space to be able to use that gift in communication. I think once we really understand what the other person needs, then already we become better communicators, better team players, better colleagues, and we can actually do great things because we're moving in the same direction together. If we fail to communicate well with each other, that breaks down completely. And what we have is something that's just not going to work in the long run. We can only get so far. So together. Do it together and communicate together well.
I'm going to close that so aptly. I love what you've said. And I know you will resonate with what Nelson Mandela said. He said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Yes. So Stephanie, it has been a wonderful privilege having you here with us in studio. I'm looking forward to welcoming you back again, telling us about everything you're studying, everything you're bringing with advanced consultants into the education space. It is my privilege, Stephanie, to thank you and to introduce you to our early years community. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And I just want to say this platform, this conversation, the importance that you're bringing to the early years education sector is invaluable. It's priceless. And what a woman we have leading the show here. So thank you for having me. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. Our amazing guest, Stephanie Martin. Go and follow her on Instagram. Her handle is She Speaks by Stephanie Martin. If you've enjoyed our episode, we would love for you to review, like, follow us on YouTube, on Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. This is Let's Talk Early Years. See you next time.